During the Great Depression, a lonely housewife develops a strong connection with a new farmhand, and their relationship drastically changes the course of her life. In 1937, Roxy and her husband Aaron go about their usual chores around their struggling tobacco farm located 10 miles from their hometown of Tarboro, North Carolina. That evening, while the man plays his banjo by the window, the woman sews a garment for their daughter in bed. Then she looks up and sees their wedding picture on the table. 5 years ago, Roxy's grandmother, who raised her after her mother died, passed away from an illness. Days later, her father Will and his second wife Ruth attended the funeral with their kids. Then, Aaron approached Roxy and asked if she planned on moving in with her father, but she said it'd feel strange because Ruth was her mother's younger sister. In the present, the man grabs his wife's waist and moves her toward the bed. He removes his top and initiates lovemaking, and she mentions how she wanted to do the deed last night, but he turned her down. Aaron reasons that he did so because he had to wake up early this morning, prompting the woman to point out that she thinks he only wants to make love because he doesn't have anything better to do. Concerned she might have offended the man, Roxy kisses him and they make love. After the deed, the husband puts his clothes back on and exits the room, leaving his wife alone in bed. The next day, Will hangs out with his friends on the porch of the funeral home he owns. Suddenly, they spot Jack, an unfamiliar man carrying a suitcase walking along the street. Strother jokes that he probably heard about how the mortician has a reputation for hiring any desperate man looking for a job. However, Will says he couldn't offer the drifter a job even if he wanted to because he currently has enough employees. Meanwhile, Roxy sees Jack from inside the parked car and wonders who he is. He places his belongings by the steps and tells Strother and Bass that he'd like to speak to Will, so the older men instruct him to head inside the building. Eventually, Aaron returns to the car and the couple drives away with their daughter Baby. The next day, the man's parents stop by to ask him if he'd like a ride to town, but he says he'll stay home because he has to plant a new batch of seedlings. However, the farmer tells his wife that she and their daughter should probably join his parents on the trip. While Roxy gets dressed in the bedroom, Aaron waits in the living room with the guests. When they arrive at the funeral home, Ruth welcomes the group and immediately grabs Baby. Then Callie, Roxy's half-sister, takes her to the backyard because she has something to tell her. Suddenly, her half-brother Raider opens the door and tries to scare them. The boy says he and his sister finally saw a dead body. So Callie explains that someone from school told her that a man who died from a fire was brought to the mortuary. Eventually, the teen tells Roxy about an unfamiliar man she saw at the funeral home and recounts how charmed she was when he complimented her. Meanwhile, Will tells his friends that Jack helped him with a body last night, but laments how he can't hire him despite his potential as a mortician. Seconds later, the drifter sneaks up behind to scare Strother, much to his friend's amusement. As Jack walks by, Roxy curiously watches the banter between the men. 2 weeks later, the woman spots the hearse stopping by the house, but instead of her father, she sees Jack exit the vehicle. The man walks toward her and introduces himself, but she quickly pulls her hand away. Roxy asks what he's doing there, so Jack explains that Will sent him over to help out on the farm. Moments later, Aaron arrives and immediately puts the new farmhand to work. As she watches the two men through the window, she recalls seeing Jack in a dream talking to her late grandmother. Despite Roxy cooking dinner, Aaron says he'll drive Jack to town and that he'll be right back. However, the husband returns hours later and says he grabbed a bite to eat while in town. Then, he mentions that Jack's coming back next Saturday to help fix the well, and that he gave him a mandolin string for his banjo. On Saturday morning, while Roxy prepares the food for dinner, she remembers her grandmother telling her how everything bad in her life happened in the middle of March. That evening, Jack joins the couple for dinner and the woman overhears the guest complimenting her cooking. Days later, Aaron invites the farmhand over so they can play their instruments together. That night, Roxy and Baby listen to them play by the fire, and the woman finds herself stealing glances at Jack. In the next few weeks, she observes how her husband and the farmhand are starting to form a genuine friendship. Later, the woman overhears Aaron telling Jack a story about his high school girlfriend. When the man sees his wife, he quickly changes the subject and asks the farmhand where his parents live, but he says they're both dead. That afternoon, Jack walks into the house and sees Roxy preparing for a bath. so the embarrassed woman covers up and says her husband isn't home. Suddenly, the man approaches her, leans close, and whispers that she's pretty. Then, he immediately steps away and exits the house, leaving the housewife flustered and confused. That evening, Aaron suggests the farmhand stay in the spare room because driving back and forth in the rain and through the muddy roads is an inconvenience. The next day, Jack accepts the offer, so the husband tells the woman to clear out the dresser in the spare room. That night, while the couple's about to make love, they hear a knock on the front door. Aaron opens the door and the farmhand enters carrying his belongings, ready to move in. One evening, the disappointed Roxy hears her husband tell Jack that he can borrow the truck anytime he wants to go to town to see Ava. While lying awake in bed, she hears the truck engine start, and she wonders if the farmhand's on his way to see his lover. The next morning, the woman learns that Jack went to help out his friend with an automobile accident last night. One day, Aaron tells his wife that he needs to head to his father's farm to help fix the fence. Because he promised to watch their daughter for the day, he takes baby with him. Moments later, while the woman brushes her hair outside the house, Jack suddenly appears. She says she thought he went on a trip, but instead of answering her question, the man grabs her and they make love in the middle of the tobacco fields. When it's time to harvest, Aaron gathers his workers and says he's got a good feeling about the crop this year. As a treat for the workers and the kids helping out, Roxy brings them some homemade fudge, and a woman cracks open a watermelon for everyone to enjoy. Suddenly, the farmhand passes by in the truck and they exchange a longing look. Hours later, the family and the workers tie the leaves onto the drying racks in the barn. That night, while Aaron stays in the barn to closely monitor the tobacco curing process, Roxy sneaks into Jack's room and they make love. The next day, when the group continues harvesting the crops, the woman remembers the many secret rendezvous she and her lover shared. During lunch, she and the farmhand can't help but exchange knowing smiles at the dining table. After the meal, everyone else leaves to return to the fields. Then Roxy takes Jack's shirt, which he left on his chair, and gently caresses and smells it. That night, since it's the farmhand's turn to watch the curing process, he and the woman make love in the barn. The next morning, the husband thinks they should attend his family's 4th of July barbecue, but Roxy says she doesn't want to go because the loud noises give her anxiety. When the man reiterates that his family is expecting them to be there, she insists that she isn't going, much to his annoyance. Later, the woman wipes her face with a damp washcloth and then gets started with lunch by boiling peas on the stove. In her room, she sits in front of the mirror and traces the lines on her hand. She remembers her grandmother telling her that she has a long lifeline and a long crooked double love line. Suddenly, the farmhand enters the room and they share a passionate kiss. He says he has a present for her, but she tells him to wait until after she changes baby's diaper. Later, Roxy uses the present, a camera, to take a picture of Jack holding the toddler. Then, to take a picture of both of them, the man heads inside the house to grab some string. However, because they're too distracted posing for the photograph, they don't notice baby climbing the steps and entering the house. Suddenly, they hear baby's pained cries, and they find her on the floor next to the overturned pot, implying that she tried to reach for it and got injured by the boiling water. In the hospital, the distraught woman explains what happened to her husband once he arrives. Eventually, the doctor hands the toddler back to her mother and says they can take her home. Upon seeing the bandages on the child's legs, Roxy asks if her injuries are going to leave scars, and the physician says most likely. Later, the woman asks Jack about the camera and he says he hid it. That night, she wakes up and realizes her husband and child are no longer next to her. She finds them by the front steps, and the resentful man makes it abundantly clear that what happened to their daughter was her fault. So Roxy changes the bandages on baby's legs, but when she returns to bed, Aaron turns away, implying that he still hasn't forgiven her. The next day, the husband says his father told him that it might be for the best to give Jack his money and send him on his way after the first batch of tobacco gets to market. He adds that he's already told the farmhand that they'll be able to manage on their own after the first sale. Then, Aaron says people at church think it doesn't look right for another man to live in the house, and his tone makes her wonder if he knows about the affair. That evening, the woman heads to the barn to talk to Jack, but instead of discussing the matter at hand, he tells her he loves her and they make love. After the deed, Roxy finally tells the farmhand that he needs to go. He says she could always run away with him, but she reminds him that she's married and has a daughter. The next day, Aaron asks his wife if she talked to Jack last night about him leaving the farm, and she says yes. Later, the men watch as the buyers place their bids on their goods. That night, Roxy kisses her husband to congratulate him on a successful first market day, much to the farmhand's annoyance. After the husband says their family should attend the annual dance since the employee can look after the house while they're gone, the incensed Jack gets up from the table and leaves. During the festivities, the married couple happily watches the fireworks along with the other townspeople, and the woman hopes she and her husband can eventually move on and forget about the affair. The next day, Roxy finds the farmhand trying to take down an insect nest in the barn. She tells him to be careful or he might get stung. And when the startled man kisses her, she immediately leaves. After dinner, Jack tells Aaron that he should look at the strange animal he killed in the barn earlier. Hours later, the farmhand returns by himself and orders the woman to pack her suitcase because they have to leave as soon as possible. She obediently follows his instructions. But when she asks where her husband is, Jack says he'll tell her all about it later. The next morning, they arrive at a tourist camp and the man gets them a room. Inside, Roxy says she needs to go home. So the farmhand finally comes clean and admits that he killed Aaron by hitting him twice on the head with a shovel and burying him in a hole behind the barn. Distraught and furious, the woman pushes him away and cries on the bed. After they wake from a nap, Jack says they need to leave soon. However, after kissing her and seeing the look on her face, he realizes that he was being presumptuous to assume she'd run away with him. He says he knows someone in Birmingham he can stay with and promises to come back for her as soon as he can. After the man leaves, Roxy grabs her daughter and asks for help from the caretaker. Later, a police officer arrives and says they picked the farmhand up just before he boarded the bus out of town and that he told the authorities where he buried Aaron. However, the cop says Jack claimed he and the woman planned the murder together. At the station, the police officer tells Roxy that her arraignment's on Monday morning. In the vehicle outside the funeral home, Will expresses his guilt and remorse for hiring the drifter and inadvertently causing the tragic demise of his son-in-law. Eventually, the mortician tells his daughter that she needs to see her late husband's body. When the woman sobs next to the coffin, her father approaches and comforts her. Days later, the story of the deadly love triangle makes its way to the local paper. Then, Ruth enters Roxy's bedroom and shows her the black dress she personally chose for her to wear to the arraignment. The next day, nosy journalists and photographers hound the woman the moment she exits the vehicle outside the courthouse. When the bailiff brings out the suspect, Roxy quickly turns away to not look at him. In the confession, Jack claimed he only killed Aaron because the woman couldn't run away with him since she was married, implying that the man's death was what she wanted. Eventually, Roxy's called to the stand and she admits that the instances of infidelity were consensual, and she wanted to go down to the barn to be with a farmhand. The lawyer asks if they made love every day since the first time it happened, and she says yes, except during the days her husband was home or she was sick. When the lawyer encourages the jury to send the lovers to the gas chamber, Jack rises to his feet and says the woman never said she'd run away with him and that he pushed her into the car that night after he killed Aaron. He adds that Roxy never knew what happened, and when he finally told her, she ran away and hid. So the jury found the woman not guilty of conspiracy to murder and found the farmhand guilty of murder in the first degree. The next day, the widow overhears her father stating that he might send her to live with a relative, but Ruth protests. Then, the older woman enters the bedroom and gently wipes Roxy's face with a washcloth. She shares that she didn't know how to say no to Jack when they were at the tourist camp because the only other time she'd done so was to Aaron on the 4th of July. Ruth offers her some comforting words and assures her that the worst is over. On their way to the farm, Will tells Roxy that it might be best if she and baby stay with her Aunt Kate for a while. However, the woman says she won't stay in Tarboro her whole life, but that her daughter needs to be around her family right now. She adds that she'll ride out whatever repercussions she suffers from her past actions, just like everyone in their resilient family who's been able to endure challenges for generations.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.